This is a Fox News alert. I'm Chris Wallace in for Brett Baer. Donald Trump has closed the gap with Hillary Clinton. That's the headline from just released Fox News polling. The Clinton lead now stands at 41% to 39%. That's within the margin of error of plus or minus 3 points, which is a statistical tie. Those numbers were in a four-way presidential race. Head-to-head, Trump has shaved 4 points off Clinton's 10-point lead earlier this month. All this comes as Trump delivers a major speech on immigration tonight. Earlier today, the GOP nominee made an unexpected trip to Mexico to meet with that country's president. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron has the latest tonight from Phoenix.
Mexicans are just beyond reproach.
Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were both invited to Mexico last Friday by President Enrique Peña Nieto. Trump got there first and fast and called it a very productive meeting.
I shared my strong view that NAFTA has been a far greater benefit to Mexico than it has been to the United States, and that it must be improved upon, ending illegal immigration, not just between our two countries, but including the illegal immigration and migration from Central and South Americans.
Trump got the treatment he'd hoped for, a joint appearance on the international stage. The Mexican president, who compared Trump's rise to Hitler and Mussolini, was diplomatic.
We may not agree on several issues, but your presence here, Mr. Trump, shows a fundamental coincidence. Our countries are very important. I fully believe that NAFTA has been good, both for the United States as well as for Mexico.
Nieto acknowledged that Trump's rhetoric has often offended Mexicans.
I had also voiced the grievances that we had felt in Mexico because of the statements that have been issued.
Trump accepted the Mexican invitation in part to hype his big speech tonight in Phoenix, Arizona, clarifying his immigration reform goals, on which for several weeks Trump's appeared to be wavering. Aides say the meeting had a more broad agenda.
Obviously illegal immigration, but also trade, also drugs flowing over the border. And it's very important to show that you're willing to work with a neighboring country before you're president.
Trump's harsh rhetoric has caused alarm in Mexico. Former President Vicente Fox voiced it bluntly this morning.
Let me tell you, he is not welcome to Mexico. By 130 million people, we don't like him, we don't want him, we reject his visit.
Trump quickly responded on Twitter, quote, "Former President Vicente Fox, who's railing against my visit to Mexico today, also invited me when he apologized for using the F-bomb." Not to be outdone, Fox rapidly returned fire, quote, "I invited you to come and apologize to all Mexicans. Stop lying. Mexico's not yours to play with. Show some respect." Fox once said there was no bleeping way Mexico would pay for Trump's wall. And Donald Trump and the current Mexican president did talk about the wall, but not who was going to pay for it. That's one of the unanswered questions that we expect to get more enlightenment on in tonight's speech here in Phoenix, which has a much, much bigger spotlight on it tonight, Chris, because of Trump's trip to Mexico this afternoon. Carl, thank you. Let's take a moment to trace the evolution of Donald Trump's thinking on immigration. Taking us on that journey is Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
From the day Donald Trump launched his once improbable bid for the Republican nomination, illegal immigration has been his signature issue. He promised to build a wall along the entire southern border.
They built the Great Wall of China. That's 13,000 miles. Here we actually need 1,000 because we have natural barriers.
And to make Mexico pay for it. He promised to revive the mass deportations of the Eisenhower era.
You're going to have a deportation force, and you're going to do it humanely.
And not to approach the existing population of illegal immigrants here with half measures.
We have at least 11 million people in this country that came in illegally. They will go out. They will come back. Some will come back, the best, through a process. They have to come back legally.
The proposal for the wall has stayed, and Trump, now the GOP nominee, still promises to deport the criminal elements, but he appears to have backed off his pledge to deport all 11 million.
And there certainly can be a softening because we're not looking to hurt people. We want people. We have some great people in this country. We have some great people in this country.
As part of that softening, Trump's talk of a deportation force has yielded to proposals rather similar to those put forward by the rival GOP candidates he once derided as weak on immigration, including the use of e-verification and steps undocumented workers can take to remain here.
They'll pay back taxes. They have to pay taxes. There's no amnesty as such. There's no amnesty.
Right.
But we work with them.
Most vocal in their alarm over Trump's shifts have been supporters on the right, many of whom waited their adult lives to hear a GOP nominee speak like Trump has on immigration. But two prominent players agree there's been no shift.
People will need to leave the country to be able to obtain legal status or obtain citizenship, and that's going to be very consistent with what he said throughout the course of this campaign.
People have been coming out already on his team and saying, no, we're still going to have a deportation force, don't worry about that. So we'll see what he says.
If Trump's shifts on immigration are driven by his low poll numbers among Hispanics, as his critics charge, then he's headed in the right direction. The Fox News poll conducted this week finds 77% of registered voters supporting a system for illegal immigrants working here to become legal residents, with only 19% favoring deportation, Chris. And that stays a heavy majority, even if you break it down by the two parties.
More on all this with the panel, James. Thank you. Hillary Clinton is continuing to woo Republicans and independents who are not sold on Donald Trump. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin is with the Clinton campaign tonight in Cincinnati.
After days of fundraising in the Hamptons, Hillary Clinton returned to campaigning in the swing state of Ohio as Republicans launched a new line of attack, keeping a running tally of when she last held a press conference. December 4th, according to the RNC. That's 270 days and counting.
I think we're ready to take a few questions.
At the American Legion National Convention in Cincinnati, she continued to try to appeal to Republicans and independents.
I suppose there are some of you who've never voted for a Democrat before. I get that.
She used terminology favored by Republicans when talking about America's leadership role in the world.
Part of what makes America an exceptional nation is that we are also an indispensable nation. My opponent in this race has said very clearly that he thinks American exceptionalism is insulting to the rest of the world. In fact, when Vladimir Putin, of all people, criticized American exceptionalism, my opponent agreed with him, saying, and I quote, "If you're in Russia, you don't want to hear that America is exceptional."
Another example of how her appeal may be working in some cases, today Clinton received the endorsement of James Cladd, a top Defense Department official under George W. Bush. He joined 50 other Republican former national security officials who recently said they won't support Trump. But continuing questions about Clinton's relationship to her family foundation as Secretary of State have led to trouble in the polls. A new Fox News poll shows 66% of voters think it's likely the Clintons were selling influence to foreign contributors who made donations to the Clinton Foundation. 43% of Democrats polled believe the same thing. Clinton used her speech today to critique Donald Trump's trip to Mexico.
It certainly takes more than trying to make up for a year of insults and insinuations by dropping in on our neighbors for a few hours and then flying home again.
Overnight, the campaign said it also received an invitation from the Mexican president and looks forward to meeting him at an appropriate time. Quote, "What ultimately matters is what Donald Trump says to voters in Arizona, not Mexico, and whether he remains committed to the splitting up of families and deportation of millions." According to the new Fox poll, 44% say both Trump and Clinton are, quote, terrible candidates. Only 35% say Trump is honest or trustworthy, barely more than the 31% who say Clinton is. Chris?
Jennifer Griffin with the Clinton campaign in Cincinnati. Jennifer, thank you. We're still awaiting the release of files from the